Well, thanks for joining us, David. I guess the first question is, there'll be a lot of businesses out there in the UK that are quite concerned about the impact of tariffs from the US. What impact will it be, do you think, over the course of the next few weeks and months?
So for those businesses who are directly exporting goods to the US, they will be impacted straight away. So their US importers will face extra costs in bringing their goods in. Some will choose, therefore, not to bring the costs in. Some will ask them for prices to come down. Some of them who have been sending, for example, smaller packages, those will suddenly attract duties, whereas they didn't before. So big changes there. For those businesses which are not directly sending goods to the US, but other businesses, they'll have the knock-on effects. There may be, well, there already is an effect in the stock market. There may well be a slowdown in the economy. And there may be other measures by other countries which affect them. For example, there may be a flood of cheaper imports from countries affected by Trump's tariffs, diverting products to the countries like the UK.
What sectors are going to be directly affected in the short term?
The most affected sector is automotive. Car imports into the US are going to attract a 25% tariff. JLR is by far the UK's largest exporter of cars to the US. They have suspended shipments for the time being on that. That's a big potential blow to them. That's about 8 billion of UK exports. Steel and aluminium products plus derivatives are affected. So, for example, businesses around Sheffield, they're affected by also a 25% tariff. That's far less than the automotive sector. That's in the hundreds of millions, but clearly the steel sector in the UK is already struggling, so that will make an impact as well. Other sectors will attract a 10% tariff, such as food and drink, and we're still waiting to hear about pharmaceuticals, which are currently excluded but may well be added to the Trump tariff list in the next few weeks.
Is there a case that this is the start of a process in relation to the US and other countries in terms of negotiation, and this is the top end of tariffs?
I don't think on this occasion President Trump has put the tariffs in place because he wants deals. I think he believes in tariffs and believes the US has been hard done by, and now he has the power to put the tariffs in. But I think the practical effects of the stock market reaction and indeed politics in the US will push him towards seeking deals. So I think there will be some reductions over time. I think what we don't know is when that will come into place. Will it be a matter of days before we see reversals? Will it be weeks? Will it be months? And how will the UK be affected? There's really a lot of uncertainty, so nobody really knows exactly where this is going, but it probably isn't getting much worse from the US point of view, and we're probably not going to see other countries following the US. So this is about as bad as it gets, but how quickly it improves, it is unclear.
What, in relation to a UK-US trade deal, how realistic is that prospect, do you think, and what are the opportunities that it might present itself?
There are a lot of supporters of a UK-US trade deal in Washington, and President Trump is pretty well disposed to the UK. He repeatedly says that. So I think that the actual chances of some kind of deal are pretty good. I don't think it will be a huge deal. I think it would be aiming to reduce some of the tariffs that the UK faces. The UK might be one of the first countries to have that reduction. There may well be some agreement to make some changes in the UK tech policy space, which hearing about the digital services tax, either that would be changed or abolished. We've heard a little bit about AI regulations and the UK perhaps committing to staying in lockstep with the US on that. In terms of the opportunities, there's the prospect that that makes it more attractive to locate goods exporters, export facilities in the UK, for example, for car plants to do that. But with such uncertainty around, I think that that probably won't happen quickly. It takes a long time to think about manufacturing plants, so I don't see the UK's advantage in tariffs that we already have over the EU. I don't see that in the short term leading to a significantly greater investment. This will be more about protecting the exports we already have, protecting, for example, JLR. If we can get that 25% tariff down to a point where JLR, for example, is much less affected, otherwise we stand to see job losses in the West Midlands.
In terms of the effect across the UK, obviously some regions are going to be more affected than others. How's that likely to play out?
Yeah, that's an awkward one in terms of the regional distribution of kind of pain from Trump's tariffs, because actually London is less affected. We don't make much in London. It's a services hub and that's less affected. But take, for example, Sheffield and the steel sector already hit by 25% tariffs and already in some difficulties. Take the traditional car manufacturing area around the West Midlands, JLR facing difficulties, facing a 25% tariff. What I think we could see is some regions really struggling and with a knock-on effect into their economy. And already, of course, they're behind London in terms of their economy. So I think that's something the government is going to have to think a little bit about, is whether it needs to offer some support to regions to get them through the next few months. I don't think London shouldn't be so badly affected. Some regions may be quite badly affected.
Do you, given the difference between the UK and EU in terms of the tariffs imposed by the US, do you think that has any implications for the UK-EU reset that's happening this year?
What I hear in Brussels is that there is a little bit of suspicion about the UK and our intent towards the US, that perhaps this is showing that the UK will always put US relations ahead of EU relations, or at the very least not put the EU clearly ahead, and the feeling that the UK can't be entirely trusted and we should take it slowly in terms of the reset of the trade relations. What that potentially means is that it's fairly modest what comes out of the UK-EU summit in May, certainly on the trade side, and that therefore, I think there will be a food and drink deal between the UK and the EU, but perhaps for manufacturers again, those who are suffering from the Trump tariffs, they won't get any more benefits from a trade deal with the EU. And that will come, I think, as something of a disappointment if the UK can't respond to Trump's tariffs by deepening trade relations elsewhere.
Just on that, the food and drink, what should we look for in the food and drink aspect of the UK-EU deal?
So what I'm expecting in the UK-EU summit is an agreement that the two sides will start talks about what a food and drink agreement could look like, with a view over a number of years to remove barriers to food and drink trade between the UK and the EU. So those food exporters who have been struggling, for example the cheesemakers, to get their goods into the EU may well have some promise that in a few years' time those barriers will be gone. But it'll be a process, I think, rather than a single event. So we're not expecting a deal on food and drink at the summit. We're expecting the start of a process.
Okay. Northern Ireland is in quite a unique position at this moment. Do you think it presents opportunities or risks for Northern Ireland?
There's both opportunity and risk for Northern Ireland in the current situation. So, and I'm just going to have to lay this out a little bit methodically. Goods exported from Northern Ireland to the US should only have a 10% tariff on them. So Bushmills whiskey, only a 10% tariff. Jameson's from the Republic, 20%. If the EU, as we expect, takes retaliatory action against EU tariffs, that affects goods coming into Northern Ireland from the US. So bourbon, which is on that list, faces a retaliatory tariff unless it can be proven that it is consumed within Northern Ireland, which is quite a painstaking process. That has the potential to cause some problems for businesses operating in Northern Ireland. Equally, though, there may be some opportunities for some production to be diverted into Northern Ireland for onward export into the US. So I think it's a case of, on the one hand, the UK and the EU managing the political situation in Northern Ireland, which is always a bit sensitive about when it comes to cross-border trade, to just make sure that that's kept under control. But also, yes, for Northern Ireland business, just keep an eye on the opportunities. There may well be some here. Take advantage of them if you can.
And we'll just looking at the sectors specifically. If you are in the tech industry at the moment, do you feel that the US-UK trade deal is an opportunity versus a threat?
I think if you're in the tech sector, and clearly there is some interest from the US in tech agreements with the UK. However, that's not a definite good thing. So some parts of the tech industry think that's a good thing, opportunity to get US investment, to get our regulations aligned. On the other hand, there's some concerns, for example, on AI, that some people are worried about giving permission for US companies to essentially use all UK work to train their AI. And there's a lot of concerns about that as well. And so I think it is a case of trying to understand what the opportunities and the threats might be, and to get a position to government fairly quickly on that. I mean, in general, it's a good thing for the UK because US tech companies want to be based in the UK, and that's done well for our inward investment. But if we have to start doing things that the US likes, obviously that might cost us in terms of the digital services tax. It might cost us some regulatory freedom, so we have to be careful.
Do you think some UK tech companies or businesses, in terms of their confidence for investment, they'll be looking elsewhere to Europe, Asia, rather than US for that investment?
There will certainly be companies now looking at their investments and saying, where do we want them? Is it the US? Is it elsewhere? Is that different to what happens anyway? I'm not sure it is that different. I think that's a permanent state of affairs in large corporates, is where should we be based? I think when it comes to tech, the UK is in a strong place to attract those companies. I couldn't say who's looking at what, but I think if people are looking at diversification away from the US, the UK is probably the next place they look at, and so that's certainly something to for us to aim to benefit from.
Do you think UK policymakers could do more to safeguard investment in the UK?
It's a funny one because the UK ministers, successive governments, are always talking about doing more to attract inward investment, and yet it's not obvious that that's really been followed through. And for example, in terms of making the UK a great place to export from, to be honest, we probably haven't done enough in that sense. So at the moment, the UK is going to face lower tariffs for some manufactured goods than the EU. We have plenty of trade deals as well, but we've never really made it part of our advertising, really. The UK, great place to export from. Part of it is down to the UK-EU ties. We need to do more to make sure they're strengthened. So if you can export in your own region and export into the world. So I think there's more that can be done, and a more coherent story that can be told by government on inward investment.
And on pharma, obviously currently excluded from tariffs. Is that likely to change, or?
Pharmaceuticals is a strange one in terms of tariffs, because obviously a large amount of the ultimate cost is paid by governments, even in the US with Medicaid and similar schemes. So if the US puts tariffs on pharmaceuticals, then costs to the US government actually go up, as well as getting the tariffs. I think that's one reason why they will have been excluded. But also an awful lot of the trade happens within the same very large companies. And it's quite difficult to unravel that. And certain products, Viagra is all into the US, is all coming from Ireland. So I don't know whether President Trump wants to stop Viagra coming into the US. I suspect that we will see some tariffs on pharmaceutical products to come, but I think with a little bit more caution than on cars and steel. Cars and steel were the products that the president always focused on. They're his number one go-to. What do I impose tariffs on? Pharmaceuticals would come after that.
If you were a UK business right now who's exposed to what's going on with tariffs, what would be your advice to them in terms of how they should respond at the moment?
I think every business is different, but I think it's really important for businesses to understand both their markets and where they're sourcing their inputs from, and also their competition. So to do that quick competitive assessment, am I likely to be losing out in the US? Could there in fact be opportunities because I'm now going to be cheaper than manufacturers from the EU? But equally, am I under threat from cheaper Chinese or other Asian imports? And if so, I might need to get onto government and start asking them to keep an eye out on that. Are my supply chains in any other way going to be affected by this? And are there any things I really don't want the government to do? So, for example, in the food and drink sector, a lot of businesses are saying to government, please don't retaliate against US spirits, because I sell a lot of drink into the US. This could be people who sell gin or whiskey into the US, and 10% is bad, but I might be able to overcome that. If we retaliate against their spirits further, they might then take further action against our spirits, and suddenly I'm going to lose a lot of my sales. So there's a lot of those kind of considerations to be taken into account for businesses, and to have that line of communication, if need be, with the government about what they do and don't want to see.
How important do you think the consultation that the government's doing at the moment then is in terms of businesses getting involved in that and putting their point across?
The UK government has put out a long list of products on which it could take retaliatory action. I think that's just a really first step. I don't think the UK government wants to take retaliatory action. I think it's just a kind of fishing mission to see what businesses tell them. So I think it is important to take advantage of that and talk about what your business may or may not be facing. But at this stage, don't take it almost too seriously what the UK government is intending to do. Focus on your own business, the risks, the opportunities, and open that dialogue with the government if there are some particular issues that you have.
And finally, just turning to UK-India. Obviously, there's a delegation here this week with a few years trying to get a deal with India. Is it realistic that the UK is going to get a trade deal with India?
There is a UK-India trade deal to be done, which does reduce some tariffs, some barriers to business. The problem with it is that India is quite cautious on reducing trade barriers, quite keen to retain domestic employment, and so far the UK government is a bit worried that businesses will find what's on offer too little to satisfy UK stakeholders. This might be the opportunity to overcome those barriers, maybe for India to offer a little bit more, and for the UK government to say to stakeholders, look, this is as good as it gets. I mean, I think what I worry about the UK-India trade deal is it's been running a bit too long. Personally, I think that we should aim to end these negotiations in the coming months with a deal, even if it isn't a perfect deal, and look to build from there.
What does that deal look like at the moment? Where are the opportunities currently for the UK and the barriers to getting it done?
So, to take, for example, a few sectors between UK and India, there are reduced tariffs on offer, I think, on spirits and automotive, but not as much as the UK had hoped. In terms of services, again, it's been a little bit less than the UK had wanted in terms of access to particular Indian services markets. For example, there's an argument going on around legal services. It's not ideal in terms of data. The Indians are quite protective or perhaps nationalistic about their data, and UK business want to be able to transfer data in and out. Investment protections is another area where the UK companies would like to see something. India is quite reluctant. all of those can be resolved, but trying to sort of do that in a fair and balanced package is, I think, has been the problem. But maybe the opportunity now if both sides have a little bit more focus.
And just summarising where we are at the moment with everything, what do you think, if you look ahead in a year's time, where will we be? What's your gut feeling?
So I think the big stories are that the US has been moving for some time away from being a free trade leader to being more protectionist, aiming to encourage more manufacturing in the US. I think that stays. Whether the tariffs stay at their exact level, I'm not sure. I don't think the rest of the world follows in anything like the same way. So I think that the world of trade carries on. I think that Asia and trade within Asia becomes more important in terms of global trade. I think that Europe needs to be looking in that direction to strengthen its own trade relations. Fundamentally, I don't think there's a change. There's not a deglobalization going on, but it's a more challenging environment for companies to do business in, and it's a more challenging environment for governments to work out what's in the best interests of their economy.
So from a UK perspective, is it uniquely placed as a country to deal with the tariff situation?
I think the UK is well placed to deal with US tariffs, if not perhaps uniquely placed. We're predominantly a services exporter. Services are not really being targeted at the moment. We do need to make sure that our services are in good shape. Take, for example, higher education, where there's some tensions at the moment, some issues. So we need to resolve those. We're relatively attractive for investment in services, less so on manufacturing. I think a lot of that is about trying to deepen the EU ties, not going dramatically up to government red lines, but just improving the ties to give a little bit more confidence that companies that invest in manufacturing in the UK are going to be able to export to both the EU and the US and other markets. And I think we need a better story for attracting that investment. But at the same time, Trump seems to quite like us. A lot of businesses seem to quite like us, so we're not badly placed at the moment, but there's going to be a lot of turmoil, so we have to navigate that carefully as well.
Thanks, David, so much for your time today. If you'd like to find out more, please subscribe to our LinkedIn newsletter, The Edit.